be a last presenter for today, which means I can talk as much as I can, so nobody's after again.
No.
No? Sorry. But on a plus side, I don't know any Chuck Norris jokes, so we can start. So I'm a historian, and I hope that I'll be the only historian on this stage today, but as we discovered an hour ago, Martha Kaczmarek is interested in underwater archaeology, which is history, and I can assure you that is way much more interesting than military history by far. I'm representing right here National Defense Academy of Latvia, where I teach cadets military history, or at least they feel so. So usually when you think about military history, you think it's unpronounceable surnames and dates people forget immediately, and we are trying not to do that. What we are trying to do, we are trying to use military history as a tool to enhance their professional skills. So they know how to fight, so they know how to make the right decision and using right tools, and we do not care whether they know all the important military thinkers and things like that. On the other hand, I'm representing the University of Latvia as well, where I participate in a few projects. Land project where we try to look how environmental landscape changed, especially looking how the warfare going on. So, and usually thinking about military historian, you would think that I had to start with some kind of Clausewitz and Sun Tzu quote, and I actually was too lazy to bother with that. So what I will do today, I will try to explain, I will use one example of a very famous, rather famous battle here in Latvia. I will use to explain how geographical information systems might be used, and actually geographical information systems are even much more important research tools if you want to understand what happened in terms of military history. And what I will talk about Latvian hero, Colonel Oskars Kalpaks. That's his monument, and as you will go, and I hope all of you will go to after party, you will actually go nearby that monument, so pay a second attention and then go to party. Oskars Kalpaks was the first Latvian commander during War of Independence in 1990 who decided to fight for an independent Latvia. And on this monument you see how he looked like, or as we think how he looked like, because unfortunately he died quite early, and this is one of the two pictures we have of him while he was fighting against Red Army in early March 1990. He was a very brave, and for typical Russian army style, an officer always wanted to lead from up front. When something went wrong, he always moved up front and tried to do that by personal example. Not go forward, but follow me. And it worked quite well for him for a while, but unfortunately, during that battle, it did not end up very well. I will not go much into technical details, and as I promised, no very many unpronounceable surnames. But that battle happened 150 kilometers west of Riga, where we are right now, near a small town of Skrunda. That's where the Skrunda is located in a road. There is Liepaja, another 100 kilometers approximately. And that was a very important part in our history. We had to liberate Latvia from Red Army, and that was the first attacks, one of the first attacks. And plan was quite simple. We will attack Red Army, so the bad guys in the forest. Forest was a larger base, like 10 by 10 kilometers, and as we will move forward, there will be two battalions, Latvian unit on the left, German battalion on the right, and the bad guys in front of us. At the end of the day, we have to reach a road, right here you can see a road, and to stop at that road. In order not to shoot at each other, the commander gave us a line, boundary line, which is a line from point A. In this case, that was kind of crossroad west of Graver. And up north, there was another point, Bahnhof Nuške, or Nuške railway station. There was a narrow gauge railway and an obvious choice, everybody knows how railway station look like. It's kind of simple. You have rails, and then you have some kind of wooden hop, and then something nearby, and maybe some type of name. So what you're looking for is name Nushka. Easy. What could go wrong? Battle started on the 6th of March. They attacked, they moved through the forests, they defeated bad guys, they were retreating, and after a short break in early afternoon, they kept going, and after they entered, kind of moved out of the forest, on the other side of the forest, Latvians saw on the near house there were some machine guns, and apparently they felt there were some Red Army soldiers over there. They attacked, stopped for a while, and Oskar Skalpaks, as brave as he was, decided to move up forward and led from up front. 15 minutes later, he was hit by bullets in his stomach and died a few hours later. So we lost our real hero. He was really, really brave man. And to add to that tragedy, after another 15 minutes, they discovered those were not bad guys, Red Army, those were Germans. The other battalions that were supposed to be on the other side of the front line. So something went wrong. There was a line, and somebody crossed that line. And for about more than 100 years, it was not really a mystery, but for me, it was always a lot of questions. What went wrong, really? And how we do know, how we research that in terms of military history, what are our sources? So this is how that looked like. Another very few pictures we have. It was a snowy morning, kind of misty thing, the people walking across the field, and there was an accident. And how you do that? You look for your traditional primary sources. It's a kind of something written down. You have a documentation, an order, and in this case, I'm using real orders in German language. That's the order he received, that's the Bartel Nushka mentioned. Or it's a memoirs. Some of the soldiers wrote what happened. We were fighting bad guys, and then bloody Germans started to attack us, and something like that. On the right-hand side, you see that our actual after-action scheme. That is not a map. Somebody from a memory wrote what in reality happened in that bad place. The other thing is, what we usually use is when you read just a text, it's impossible to understand what's happening. You need some kind of map. And for this battle, we have a few, and not just one map. Those two are Russians, 2 words, 3 words. This is German, 1 to 100,000. This is 1 to 50,000, and so. And as you can see, there are certain kind of differences. And it's not, so you have 1 road right here, and then you have 3 roads right here, another 3 roads, and you have 3 roads, there's 1 crossroad, there's 2 crossroads. Something, every map is something different. It's not a reality, it's that kind of what that cartographer felt he should add on that piece of paper. And when you try to discover, in my mind, it was nothing that was adding up. What's important, and where finally after 10 minutes of talking, GIS comes into picture. Today as we speak in Ukraine, military people, especially on the Ukrainian side, we heard Ilves talking about Delta systems. That's how Ukrainians are fighting. It's all based on geographical information systems, technologies and things like that. It's all digital, but for a military person, terrain, or things we go outside and we see how it all look like, is the most important part, how you make your decision. And as we speak today, pretty much everything is doable by artificial intelligence enhanced tools. It could do for you. You don't have to analyze it much. And right here you see that he excerpts from American tools. I don't know whether you are aware of that, but military personnel today are good at one thing: creating acronyms. They actually created a 4-letter acronym for a thing called CAR. So, good job. And right here, what you see on this slide, what you have is MDMP, IPB, Otsopka, Maku, and I just added half of those that were used in order to make a good military decision. What we'll do tomorrow or in a week or thing. So MDMP stands military decision-making process. That process, for example, for a unit of 100 men, that is 100 slides PowerPoint. In other words, death by PowerPoint. That is actually what military calling that. That's how they analyze, so have different layers. You understand whether tank can go there and there and there. So, where that history part is in that whole story? We can use that understanding. Of course, Colonel Oskar Skalpaks, he did not have tools like that, but he had experience. He looked on terrain and he made a decision. We'll go this way or that way. And apparently, he made a mistake. But we don't know what that mistake was. For today, we have like 3 ingredients for a military personnel to for a battle. First one, terrain, as it is, as it's kind of real thing. The second thing is military decision-making process, as I said, very step-by-step, very well organized thing. The thing what we don't know today, how it will end up, what will happen. That is unknown thing. Maybe we will be successful, maybe not. In military history, or in history in general, we know what happened. We know how it ended. We know because of excellent GIS systems, how terrain looked, and I'll show example, how it looked like 800 years ago, maybe not, but 100 definitely. You can go use LiDAR or whatnot and understand how it looked like. And that middle part, the decision-making process, that is unknown. And in this case, the most important part, how he made that mistake. And I'm using LDM Geo tool right here. You can see how this looks on a map. In reality, when you look very carefully, I'm not going step by step how I'm trying to do that. But in reality, what we have, on a map there was 1 crossroad, but in reality there were 4 crossroads right here. And road is not a line, it's a curvy thing. And every single time when we walk with cadets, exactly that place. And when we arrive at that place, there's always a question, left or right. So left or right, which way shall we go? Because if we look on a map, that crossroad is not existent on a map, but is it? It's existent. Now, when you look on GIS system, enhanced different tools and things like that. So what happened in reality, that crossroad is right here. But this is a map Oskar Skalpaks was holding, and he made a mistake. He turned left instead of going right. And he thought he's arriving right here, while in reality, he was arriving right here. So he felt, I'm here, he missed by 2 kilometers. Then there is the next thing that went wrong is, of course, Bahnhof Nuschke. It's very simple. You go till you reach that railway station, then you stop, because on the other side there will be bloody Germans. You don't want to meet bloody Germans in this case at all. What happened in reality is that Bahnhof never existed in reality. Sometimes cartographers are just lazy bastards who copy-paste old maps. And that's exactly what happened in this case. The Germans were building this narrow gauge railway line. The cartographers talked to engineers and asked them, where do you think railway station could be? And they said, somewhere right here. So cartographers placed that railway station and moved on. And when Oskar Skalpaks units, soldiers moved from point A to point B, you received an order. You move as far as possible before you reach railway station. In reality, when they reach railway station, it's another 4 kilometers to the east. And that's how a very experienced officer made a mistake. Another big thing in this story is the cover-up. Why that is important, why I believe GIS systems is so important in military history. Maybe you heard very famous Otto von Bismarck saying that people lie so much, never lie as much as after a hunt, during a war, or before elections. And I would modify, yes, they do lie more after war is over. And we are seeing again that same thing happening in Ukraine. And right now, it was not, what you see right here, 3 Latvian officers who were subordinates to Oskars Kalpaks. They talk about what happened on that place 4 years later. They didn't lie. I'm not saying they lied, but they did want to explain what happened in reality. And the only way we can discover what happened and why is using modern GIS systems, which were not available to other people back home. And of course we can use for different other applications as well. It's not just who was fighting whom and who made a mistake. In this case, that is that same forest, and I'm using Statistics Bureau of Latvia, densely populated area. Once in a while, not in this case, but in other, unfortunately, Latvia was fighting happened in Latvia every 50 years for a very, very long time period. And quite often you can hear, oh, this area is uninhabitable right now because of war. Sometimes it's true, sometimes not so much as in this case. There are economical reasons, social reasons, and things like that. Another example is that same battlefield. Now there will be wind energy park built on that road, and not in this case. I'm not saying that we have to preserve all of that and not wind parks building. Not the case. I believe in wind parks, that's personal opinion. But sometimes you can hear people say, no, you can't build anything on that place because Oskars Kalpaks made a mistake 80 years ago. And then you can use GIS systems saying, no, not the case. It happened in different places for different reasons, so don't use military history to make your point for other cases. And that's how you can use it. And this is just a one small kind of example. And it's very useful, in my opinion, for the first time, not for the first time, but to teach young officers, always trust technology, and always make sure you know where you are, and always walk your battlefield as much as possible, because sometimes those lazy cartographers will do a bad job. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to comments, questions, and things like that.
Thank you, Valdis, for this very refreshing take on geoinformation and technology and cartographers. Do we have any cartographers here in the audience? Okay, there's a guy who made a base map here, so...
Use base map instead, definitely.
Okay, so let's see if there's questions from the audience. Not at the moment, but please, if you have a question.
We have a question over there, so...
Well, you can tell me the question, I will repeat it over the microphone.
So we have one question. You have.
Yeah, this was super entertaining, and the only question I have: do you have a blog or something?
No, I do not. So I'm just teaching history. So.
Yeah.
But you can pay me, and I'll maybe.
Well, it is fascinating, and thinking back to our discussion we had, like, when can you start analyzing things like this from a historical point of view? Maybe you can explain that as well, because there's a lot of, conflicts going on, but you cannot really take it as history yet. When can you take it as history?
Yeah, and that is not about military history only, it's about what is history, that basic question. When we can start talking about history, and the one take on this is when the last person involved in that event passed away, then there is history. Unfortunately for historians, we would have to wait a very long time before that happens. So you have different things. Why that is important, and we're seeing that in the events that are happening right now in Ukraine. And I had experience with soldiers who fought in World War II as well. You talk to them, and for example, there's a person saying their battle lasted for 5 days, and he wrote in his memoirs, battle lasted for 5 days. You look on documents, you look on GIS systems again, modern maps where everything happened. No, it can't be 5 days, it's just 48 hours. I talked to that person and said, Roland, it's not possible. And he said, I remember it was 5 days, so it will stay 5 days. And when we translated his memoirs, we kind of added a quote saying, he believes it was 5 days. It was maybe not, but we will leave it because he remembers that. That is a very important part of that, to kind of acknowledge that that's how human memory works in stressful situations. Time stops. Time stops and you think it was forever, but it was 15 seconds.
Yeah, we have now some questions from the audience as well, because I think everybody was so mesmerized by your presentation they didn't have time to write their questions. But this is a good one. Actually, this is why were you interested in this particular moment? And I think the next one is also linked to it, because there's a lot of myths regarding this story. And is it because of a conspiracy theory?
Yes. So I don't know whether you know, but we're in Latvia. We have a national sport of hating Germans. And it's for a long history. It's not true. We don't have to hate Germans for everything, and not because of Germans. There are bad things happening in Latvia. Forget about that. But it was for a very long time thing, because Germans killed Oskars Kalpoks. They killed on purpose, and that was a kind of sneaky conspiracy. Not the case. You walk that road, you will understand mistakes could be made. Why I'm interested in this particular, as I said, there are mistakes made, and as we speak right now, unfortunately, Ukrainian soldiers make mistakes like that. Unfortunately, Russian soldiers make mistakes like that quite a lot, and we try to use it as an example. You have to make sure where you are. You have to follow that MDMP process. We teach soldiers 1 year everything in order to make that 100 slides of a PowerPoint. It is important. The other thing is, my primary kind of research is World War II history, and I worked 20 years in War Museum, now 10 years in National Defense Academy, and when I did representations, it was like that. It's history. If something will happen today, it will be different. And then 4 years ago, Vladimir Putin said, hold my beer. And he's killing hundreds of thousands of his soldiers the same way he was doing that during World War II. I'm not going into very grim details how that looks like, but believe me, it is exactly the same way. So there is a reason why we try to use history in order to enhance the skills of our soldiers and officers.
Another question, this one more about technology, I think. What to do during war when you don't have GPS, or maybe you don't have these technological geoinformation systems at hand?
So what happened is, they quite often were doing by the gut feeling. In this case, in case of Oskars Kalpoks, his gut feeling did a kind of bad joke to him. He made a mistake. But when you read about Napoleon's, and I mentioned Clausewitz and all those guys, there is a reason why certain military commanders, we can watch movies about them, and then about another military commanders, we don't see movies at all because they died in the first battle. And today, all those tools, like artificial intelligence, is kind of enhancing all of that, and it's much more easier. And just to mention an artificial tool in our academy with my colleague Carlos, we do have a whiteboard, and it's written, we still have a job. Because every time some cadet is sending an essay which is generated by artificial intelligence, still full with a lot of bullshit we wrote, we still have a job. And for a historian, it's still a long way before artificial intelligence will push us out to do something more useful.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there, especially for historians. In some cases, the AI hallucination can be tolerated to a certain extent, but that's not the case in history. That's where you should have zero tolerance for any made-up hallucination.
Yeah, and it's still working. I like that.
Yeah, and but overall, I would maybe question a little bit not the history, but also the future of war, which is always linked to history. But now we're moving more and more towards autonomous decision-making, kill chains. Do you how do you tackle that question or problem also from your historical point of view?
I already warned you, I will talk forever, so here we go.
We still have a few minutes, so people from the other room.
Okay,
yeah.
it's still, it's called a human person in loop to make that final decision. There are certain, we're actually seeing how Ukrainian UAVs are creating havoc on Russian heavy tracks and fuel tracks as we speak right now, which is good. But there are certain things, more complicated things that AI couldn't do that much. So there's still some, for example, it's very difficult to measure whether your personnel, let's say 100, you cannot measure morale. And morale, or do I trust my commander, is big part whether your unit will be successful in the upcoming battle. Well, I mentioned by Oscar Skalpaks, it's very important, follow me, not move forward. And IE will not help you to measure whether when you say follow me and then you walk on your own on that field, or whether how many people will follow you. You have to have that feeling. When you look on your men, you see that they will follow you. You can measure all the different metrics, how much fuel I had, how was the soil, how much, whether that tank could go across this field or not. All that terrain kind of analysis is right here, but there is still the question whether we are ready to walk into our death. And that is very, very tricky one. And unfortunately today, and that's not what it's not my opinion, it's opinion of Ukrainian high-rank officers who are saying, with all the UAVs, you need an infantry today. And infantry today is the most unobtainable thing both sides have in Ukraine. Because you know you might be dying the first 5 minutes, and you need that bravery to walk towards that goal, and that IE will never change, unfortunately. Unfortunately, and for Ukrainian infantry, that you go on YouTube, you could see a lot of examples how that is very important. So, I think we are moving so much away from history into grim reality. And I'm kind of looking forward to kind of parties.
We're getting to that. I'm just also looking at the comments. They're very nice and commanding, like saying they really enjoyed your program in Latvia Radio 1. So keep up the good work on that sense. And we already heard you should have a blog. So your speeches are very interesting and always ask a lot of debate, especially, instead of Germans, should we blame cartographers? Was one question?
No. I mean, as you noticed, it's very difficult to me to talk more than 3 minutes without a joke or so. But not to blame cartographers, but you have to make sure when that map is made, for what purpose, at what time, whether who did it, and something like that. You have to do your research. Don't take all historical map as a money, so that will be useful on all occasions. Not so much. That's why GIS systems are way much more useful today.
Well, thank you again, Valdis.